Andrew, keep your hands where I can see them.
What exactly is this about right now?
The stop and the seizure that never happened.
To his colleagues, Andrew Nguyen was a trusted NYPD officer. To a cocaine trafficking organization, he was something else entirely, and federal agents just caught him proving it.
That traffic stop was already documented.
He would not be able to flash his badge out of this one. The federal agents who pulled him over already knew about the 8 kilograms in the trunk. They already knew about the police placard sitting on his dashboard, placed there for exactly this kind of stop. Within 90 days, prosecutors in the Southern District of New York would lay out a 3-year scheme in which NYPD officer Andrew Nguyen had rented every single tool of his job to a cocaine trafficker. The car, the badge, the database, the off-duty service weapon, 90 months in federal prison, more than $30,000 in bribes, and an arsenal sitting in plain view inside his Harriman home, waiting for a shootout that almost happened. Before we go any further, I have to ask, when you see a New York City police officer in uniform on the street, what is the first thing that runs through your head? Trust? Fear? Indifference? Drop your honest answer in the comments. And if you are new here, subscribe. This channel covers the cases where the person carrying the badge turned out to be the worst person in the room. Andrew Nguyen was born in 1984 in Flushing, Queens, to Vietnamese parents who had come to the United States in the late 70s. His father worked the kitchen line at a noodle restaurant on Roosevelt Avenue. His mother stitched piecework for a garment shop in Sunset Park. They lived in a 3rd-floor walk-up 3 blocks from the Elevated 7 train, and Andrew grew up falling asleep to the sound of subway cars rolling past his bedroom window every 6 minutes. He was the middle of 3 children. His older sister became a dental hygienist in New Jersey. His younger brother went into IT and eventually moved to Texas. Andrew was the one who watched cop shows with the volume turned up too loud and ran around the apartment with a plastic toy badge clipped to his t-shirt by the time he was 7 years old. He attended Francis Lewis High School in Fresh Meadows. His teachers described him in evaluation language that became a quiet refrain across his entire life. Polite, reliable, detail-oriented, but easily distracted when not interested in the subject in front of him. He played JV baseball, ran track for 1 season, and graduated in 2002 in the middle of his class. He spent 2 years at Queensborough Community College taking criminal justice courses. He worked nights and weekends at his uncle's PHO restaurant on Northern Boulevard, bussing tables and running deliveries on a borrowed scooter for tips that came in singles and crumpled 5s. He saved enough to take the NYPD entrance exam in the spring of 2006. He passed on his first attempt and was placed on the candidate list within 4 months. His academy class reported to the NYPD Police Academy in College Point in the fall of 2007. 6 months of training, penal law, criminal procedure, firearms qualification at the outdoor range at Rodman's Neck in the Bronx, defensive tactics in the gym at 1 in the morning because the mat rooms were booked from sunup to sundown. His instructors flagged him in their written evaluations as showing strong potential and displaying mature judgment under stress. He graduated in the spring of 2008 in a ceremony held at Madison Square Garden. His mother cried quietly in the 3rd row. His father, a man who had never in his life owned a suit, wore a borrowed gray one and pinned the shield on his son's chest himself and did not let go of his shoulders for nearly a full minute. He was assigned to the 4-0 precinct in the South Bronx, Mott Haven, one of the busiest precincts in the entire city. His field training officer was a 22-year veteran named Sergeant Mike Petrocelli, who taught him 3 rules on his first tour. Always check the back seat of a stopped car before you sit your own behind down. Never trust a quiet job over the radio, and the radio itself is the only thing in the world that will never lie to you. For his first 3 years on the job, Andrew Nguyen was a model patrolman. He racked up a dozen department commendations for arrests in domestic incidents, robbery patterns, and 1 stabbing where he applied a tourniquet that the responding EMT later said had probably saved the victim's life. He was promoted off probation on schedule, His annual evaluations described him as consistently meets and exceeds expectations and shows initiative without close supervision. In 2014, he transferred to a precinct in southern Brooklyn that ran a more active anti-crime detail. Plainclothes work, unmarked cars, knock and talks. The kind of assignment that flatters younger officers because it suggests their command sees something worth promoting. He bought his first house in Harriman, New York, an hour and 20 minutes up the Palisades Parkway in Orange County in the summer of 2015. He paid $285,000 for a 3-bedroom split level with an attached garage on a quiet cul-de-sac. He was 29 years old. He married a paralegal named Christine that same fall. By the following summer, they had a daughter. On paper, he had built the exact life the badge was supposed to deliver. A house, a wife, a child, a career that ran upward in a clean straight line for 15 unbroken years. And that was the life everyone around him saw. What none of them saw was the second life he had already started building underneath it. To understand what Andrew Nguyen was about to sell, you have to understand what an NYPD officer carries with them every single day they walk out the door of their home. The badge is the obvious one, a shield engraved with a 5-digit tax number that, once issued, belongs to that officer for the entire length of their career. Flashing it in New York City carries a specific kind of weight. It tells civilians, and more importantly other officers, that the person holding it is one of the roughly 34,000 sworn members of the largest municipal police department in the country. The service weapon is the next. NYPD officers carry a Glock 17, a Glock 19, a Smith & Wesson, or a Sig Sauer P226, all chambered in 9mm. They are required to carry off-duty within New York City limits, with limited exceptions. The department issues an off-duty registration card that allows the officer to carry that weapon legally throughout the 5 boroughs, and, under reciprocity, well beyond. The third tool is the parking placard, a laminated card placed face-up on the dashboard, identifying the vehicle as belonging to a member of service. It allows officers to park in restricted zones while conducting official business. Therefore, when a placard sits in plain view behind the windshield, traffic enforcement walks past. Patrol officers running plates on parked cars see the placard and move on. The placard is, in functional terms, a free pass on the streets of New York and across the river into New Jersey and Connecticut. The fourth and most powerful tool is the database. Sworn officers have access to multiple linked information systems. The finest system shows arrest records, active warrants, complaints, summonses, and gun licenses for anyone in the state. Through state and federal links, an officer can run names through NCIC, the National Crime Information Center, which pulls warrants and criminal records from every jurisdiction in the country. Every query is logged with the officer's tax identification number and the precise time of the lookup. But the sheer volume of queries an active officer runs per tour is so high, and the auditing of individual lookups so spotty, that a corrupt user can hide a personal search inside the noise of routine work for years before anyone in the building notices. The final tool is the Radio Motor Patrol Vehicle, the RMP, the blue and white car everyone in the 5 boroughs sees 10 times a day. To anyone who sees it on the street, the RMP is the visible promise of state authority itself. It carries a 4-digit roof number, a sector designation, a dashboard radio, a mobile data terminal, a partition cage in the back, and a trunk full of equipment. Citizens flag it down for help. Drivers pull over when it lights them up. Other officers respond to it on the radio. The RMP works only because everyone, criminals included, accepts the rule that the person sitting behind the wheel of it is one of theirs. Therefore, the entire machine runs on a single foundational bet. The bet that the officer carrying these tools is who the public and the courts and the rest of the department all assume that officer is. Andrew Nguyen would, over the course of 3 years, sell every single one of them. The first contact happened in late 2020. Federal prosecutors were never able to fully reconstruct the exact introduction, but the relationship traces back to a Queens-based cocaine wholesaler the indictment would later identify by initials only as JM, the leader of a multi-kilo trafficking enterprise operating out of warehouses in Maspeth, Long Island City, and parts of northern New Jersey. JM was already a target of an early-stage FBI narcotics investigation. He had survived for years in his line of work by being paranoid about everyone in his orbit, including, especially, anyone who carried a badge. So when Andrew Nguyen approached him through a mutual contact about what Nguyen called a professional arrangement, JM did not laugh him out of the room. He listened. The first bribe was small, a few $1,000s in cash for running a single license plate through the NYPD database. JM wanted to know if a competitor in Queens was a confidential informant. Nguyen logged into Finest from a terminal at his precinct on a quiet 4 to 12 tour. The query took less than 30 seconds. He passed the result to JM by text message later that night. The cash was handed over in the parking lot of a diner on Queens Boulevard the next afternoon. Nothing happened. No alerts. No supervisor questions. No internal affairs flag. The database lookup sat in the audit log next to 400 other queries from that same tour and never drew a second look. Therefore, Nguyen agreed to the second job, and the third, and the fourth. By the spring of 2021, he was running multiple lookups per week. He pulled criminal histories on rivals. He checked whether specific addresses had been red flagged for surveillance. He confirmed whether vehicles known to be hauling product had been logged in any precinct's recent arrest data. Each lookup was buried inside the dozens of legitimate queries he ran on his tours. But JM wanted more than information. He wanted protection. Therefore, in the summer of 2021, the operation escalated. Nguyen began driving the loads himself. The method was clinical. JM's organization would package roughly 8 kilograms of cocaine into a duffel bag or a hardshell rolling suitcase. Nguyen would meet the courier in a designated parking lot in Queens or the South Bronx, take possession of the load, and drive it to a delivery point. Sometimes Newark, sometimes Yonkers, sometimes a warehouse in Bayonne. He used his personal vehicle. He carried his NYPD-issued off-duty service weapon. He kept his shield and identification card in the center console. And he placed his department parking placard face up on the dashboard, in plain view, throughout every single run. The placard was the entire point. If a state trooper or a local patrol officer pulled him over for speeding or a brake light, Nguyen could flash the credentials, mention the precinct, drop a name or two from the local command, and roll back into traffic without ever opening the trunk. He had practiced the verbal script in his head 100 times. He was confident it would work because, statistically, it almost always does. Officers do not search the cars of other officers. The professional courtesy is older than any of them, and the firearm was not for show. Investigators would later determine that Nguyen had explicitly told JM that if a deal went sideways, he was prepared to use his off-duty service weapon to protect the trafficking organization. He was not a corrupt cop looking the other way. He was, in his own words to the dealer, your guy on the inside. By 2022, the relationship had matured into something more elaborate. JM wanted to launder the appearance of risk inside his own organization. He needed to show his suppliers that product losses were being driven by law enforcement seizures, not by his own people skimming kilos off the top. Therefore, Andrew Nguyen agreed to stage a fake drug seizure. He used a marked NYPD radio motor patrol vehicle. He used his department uniform. He used his department-issued equipment. On a date federal prosecutors would later pin down to early 2023, Nguyen drove an RMP to a designated location, conducted a sham traffic stop on a vehicle driven by one of JM's own associates, and seized a quantity of cocaine that was then quietly returned to JM's warehouse later that same night. Nguyen documented the stop in his memo book in his own handwriting. He photographed the evidence. He logged the supposed seizure through department channels. And he walked away from that tour as if it had been any other day at work. The fake stop was the smoking gun nobody knew about yet. He had taken the most sacred prop of street-level police work, the traffic stop, the moment a citizen is meant to be entirely at the mercy of state authority, and converted it into a magic trick performed for a cocaine wholesaler. Over 3 years, he took more than $30,000 in cash bribes. He solicited tens of thousands more on top of that. He used the money to upgrade the house. He bought firearms. He took a family vacation. He told his wife he had been picking up overtime details, special events, dignitary protection, the kinds of assignments that vaguely explain envelopes of cash and odd hours to a paralegal who has never worked a tour in her life. No one noticed. No one checked. The catalyst came in December of 2023. By that point, the FBI's narcotics investigation into JMI's organization had been running for nearly 2 years. Wiretaps, long-form surveillance, controlled buys, confidential informants, the whole apparatus of a major federal narcotics case. The wiretap intercepts had been picking up a recurring voice in JMI's inner circle, a voice the agents could not initially identify, a voice that talked in police radio shorthand, referenced shift schedules, used phrases like 10:85 me and the lieutenant is off this weekend, and seemed to know in advance when certain patrol units would be tied up on other jobs. In October of 2023, FBI agents working alongside the NYPD Internal Affairs Bureau finally matched that voice to a cell phone registered to a residential address in Harriman, New York. The phone belonged to police officer Andrew Nguyen, 15 years on the job, currently assigned to a precinct in Brooklyn, no prior disciplinary history of any consequence. The investigators sat on the match for almost 2 months. They did not arrest him. They did not pull him in for a courtesy interview. They watched. They listened. They documented every database query he ran for the rest of October and all of November. They watched him meet with JM twice in person, once in a diner parking lot in Astoria and once in a warehouse lot in Mazpeth. They listened to him talk on the phone about loads, routes, and timing. Therefore, when an opportunity arose to catch Nguyen in the middle of a transport job with a load of cocaine actually in his possession, the Joint Task Force took it. The mechanics of the December 2023 sting were straightforward. JM, now under heavy surveillance and entirely unaware of how thoroughly compromised his own organization had become, arranged a transport job through ordinary channels. He instructed Nguyen by encrypted message to pick up a load of approximately 8 kilograms of cocaine from a courier in a parking lot near the Whitestone Bridge in Queens and deliver it to a contact in northern New Jersey before midnight. What JM did not know was that the courier was already being watched by an FBI surveillance team. The cocaine in the duffel bag had been quietly inventoried by federal agents earlier that afternoon before being repackaged and placed in the courier's vehicle. Every single move of the handoff was being recorded from 3 different unmarked vehicles staged in the same parking lot. Nguyen arrived at the lot at approximately 7:45 in the evening. He was driving a black 2019 Honda Pilot registered to his wife. He was off duty. He was wearing jeans, a hooded sweatshirt, and a black baseball cap pulled low. His NYPD shield was clipped to his belt under the sweatshirt. His off-duty Glock 19 was holstered on his right hip. His parking placard was sitting face up on the dashboard of the Pilot. He took possession of the duffel bag, placed it in the rear cargo area under a folded blanket, and pulled out of the lot at approximately 7:51. He never made it to New Jersey. Federal agents executed the takedown on the New Jersey side of the George Washington Bridge in coordination with Port Authority Police at approximately 8:09 in the evening. They lit him up with 3 unmarked SUVs, blocked his vehicle in on the upper deck off-ramp, and approached the Pilot with weapons drawn and identifiers shouted. For the first time in 3 years, Andrew Nguyen reached for his badge and realized it was not going to save him from anything. The search of his Harriman home was conducted the very next morning. Federal agents and NYPD Internal Affairs investigators served a search warrant signed by a magistrate judge in the Southern District of New York at 6:30 in the morning. Christine Nguyen was home with their 7-year-old daughter. Investigators would later note in their reports that she appeared to genuinely have no idea what her husband had been doing for the last 3 years. She sat on the living room couch in a bathrobe and held her daughter against her chest while agents moved methodically through the house room by room. What they found inside is the part of the case that, even by federal narcotics standards, made experienced agents pause in the hallway. In the master bedroom closet, in a soft case leaning against the back wall, a loaded Glock 19 with a 15-round magazine seated and a round in the chamber. Not his department service weapon. A second, personally owned Glock 19, purchased legally years earlier and never declared as an off-duty backup. In a hard-shell rifle case under the master bed, 2 AR-15 style semi-automatic rifles, both with collapsible stocks, both with 30-round magazines seated, one with a holographic optic mounted on the upper receiver. In a second hard case in the basement, a short-barreled rifle, a weapon that, under federal law, requires registration under the National Firearms Act. It was not registered. Sitting on an open shelf above the workbench in the garage, a 60-round drum magazine, loaded. In a metal cabinet next to it, several hundred rounds of 9mm and 5.56 ammunition. Plate carrier body armor in coyote brown. A medical trauma kit in a Velcro pouch. Tourniquets. Hemostatic gauze. A pair of ballistic plates already inserted in the carrier. This was not a hobbyist's collection. This was a kit. The arsenal of someone who had thought concretely about a gunfight and was preparing to win it. The investigation reconstructed 3 years of communications. Text messages between Nguyen and JM ran into the thousands. Encrypted messaging traffic on his recovered phone added thousands more on top of that. The exchanges were direct. Nguyen, June 2022. Need 5 for this one. 8 in the bag right. JM, June 2022. Yeah, 8. 5 on delivery same as last time. Nguyen, October 2022. Placard on. Doing 70 in the right lane. Tell your guy if I get stopped, I handle it. JM, October 2022. You are the best investment I ever made, bro. Nguyen, March 2023. Stop is on the books. Memo says 1. 2 kilos field tested positive. Returning to base now. Database audit logs revealed 347 separate name queries, plate lookups, and address checks that investigators were eventually able to match to individuals, vehicles, or properties connected to JM's organization. Each one was buried inside the normal volume of Nguyen's tour activity. None had ever been flagged by a supervisor or an auditor. A forensic accounting review of his finances showed a clear pattern of cash deposits inconsistent with his NYPD salary. Cash purchases of firearms and ammunition and tactical gear from gun shops across upstate New York and Pennsylvania. Cash payments toward the mortgage. Cash for a 2022 Acura, purchased outright with no financing. Cash, cash, cash. The universal signature of someone earning income they cannot put through a bank. We are heading into the courtroom now. If you have made it this far, you already know this channel is not afraid to follow a case all the way to the sentencing transcript. Subscribe so you do not miss the next one. The verdict in this one got national attention for a very specific reason, and we are about to get to it. The confrontation, in some ways, had already happened on the off-ramp at the George Washington Bridge. But the moment that lives in the case file is the formal interview conducted at the FBI's Lower Manhattan field office at approximately 11:40 that same night. Special Agent Robert Greco, a 15-year veteran of the Bureau's Public Corruption Squad, sat across from Nguyen in a small interview room with one fluorescent ceiling fixture and no windows. Nguyen was still wearing the hooded sweatshirt from the stop. His shield had been taken from him at booking. His weapon had been taken. His placard had been taken. He was sitting in a metal chair with his hands resting flat on the metal table in front of him because nothing else in the room belonged to him anymore. Greco opened a manila folder. He set down a single photograph face up on the table. It was a still frame pulled from a fixed surveillance camera showing Nguyen stepping out of a marked NYPD RMP in his department uniform at the location of the staged traffic stop earlier in 2023. Greco spoke first. You know what this is. Nguyen looked at the photograph for a long time before he answered. I know what it looks like, Nguyen said. Greco shook his head slowly. It is not what it looks like, officer. It is exactly what it is. And we have the same kind of photograph from the warehouse handoff 20 minutes later. and the one before that, and the one before that. Nguyen did not respond. He looked down at his hands on the table. Greco set down a second photograph. The interior of the garage in Harriman, the hard rifle cases, the drum magazine on the open shelf, the plate carrier hung on a peg. "You want to tell me what you were planning to do with all of this?" Greco said. Nguyen put his face in his hands and held it there for nearly a full minute without speaking. When he finally lifted his head, his voice was flatter and quieter than it had been a moment earlier, as if something underneath it had collapsed. "I want a lawyer," he said. Those were the last words Andrew Nguyen would speak to federal agents that night, and the last words he would speak on the record about the case for nearly 2 years. The indictment was unsealed in February of 2024. 3 counts: conspiracy to solicit and receive a bribe in violation of federal law, conspiracy to distribute and possess with intent to distribute 5 kilograms or more of cocaine, and possession of a firearm in furtherance of a drug trafficking crime, the count that carries a mandatory consecutive minimum sentence and is the count federal prosecutors reach for when they want the defendant to feel the weight of every single choice he made. Nguyen was suspended from the NYPD without pay within 48 hours of his arrest. The department's formal termination proceedings ran in parallel with the federal case and were completed within months. By the time he stood before a federal judge for sentencing, he was no longer a police officer in any legal sense of the word. His defense attorney was a former federal prosecutor named David Greenfield, a veteran of the Southern District, who knew exactly how cases like this one moved and knew there was no version of the trial in which his client walked out of the building a free man. Greenfield filed the usual motions. Motions to suppress the wiretap intercepts. Motions to challenge the warrant for the Harriman house. Motions to limit the introduction of the recovered arsenal at trial as unduly prejudicial against a man not actually charged with using any of those weapons. U.S. District Judge Annalisa Torres denied each of them in measured written opinions over the course of the following year. In January of 2026, after nearly 2 years of pretrial litigation and discovery, Andrew Nguyen pleaded guilty to all 3 counts. The plea agreement contained no cooperation provisions. He did not flip on JM. He did not give up any other officers he might have spoken to inside the department. He simply pleaded and waited for sentencing. Sentencing was held on June 22, 2026, in a federal courtroom on Pearl Street in Lower Manhattan. The government's submission asked for a sentence at the high end of the guidelines, citing the systematic nature of the corruption, the duration of the conspiracy, the staged fake seizure conducted in a marked NYPD vehicle, and the arsenal recovered from the family home. The defense submission asked for leniency, citing Nguyen's 15 years of otherwise unblemished service, his lack of any prior disciplinary record, and the impact a long sentence would have on his young daughter. Judge Torres addressed Andrew Nguyen directly before she imposed the sentence. She spoke for nearly 4 minutes without looking down at her notes. "Officer Nguyen," she said, "you took an oath. You took it twice, once at the police academy in 2008, and again every single morning you put on that uniform and walked out the door for 15 years. The oath was not abstract. The oath was the entire reason the public allowed you to carry a firearm in their neighborhoods, to enter their homes, to access their personal information through databases that were never intended to function as a private resource for a criminal organization. You did not look the other way. You did not fail to act. You actively, deliberately, and over a period of years, sold every single instrument of that oath to a man who poisons communities for a living. The weapons recovered from your home tell this court that you understood exactly what you had become, and that you were prepared to defend it with deadly force, if necessary, against your own colleagues." She sentenced him to 90 months in federal prison, 7.5 years, followed by 3 years of supervised release. He was designated to FCI Otisville in upstate New York, a low-security federal facility that has historically housed former law enforcement officers because of the specific safety risks they face inside general population at higher security institutions. His projected release date sits in the early 2030s. J.M., the trafficking leader at the center of the case, was prosecuted separately on federal narcotics charges and received a longer sentence in a different courtroom. The FBI and NYPD internal affairs investigation continued for months after Nguyen's plea, reviewing every database query he had ever logged, every shift he had ever worked, every name that had ever passed through his hands during 15 years on the job. The full scope of the damage he did to active investigations may never be made public. Christine Nguyen filed for divorce in the summer of 2024. The Harriman house was sold the following spring at a small loss. Their daughter, 8 years old at the time of his sentencing, will be a teenager before her father is released from federal custody. The badge sits in an evidence locker in a federal building in Lower Manhattan. The placard was destroyed. The duty weapon was destroyed. The arsenal in the garage was destroyed. This case was disturbing, but the next case on your screen right now is even more outrageous. Click it now.